If you look at the history of the U.S. trade balance, you can see that from 1870 until 1970, the country had a constant, fairly high trade surplus. And given that this period in history closely coincides with the period of the formation of the United States as an industrial leader and a world power, of course, many Americans associate the surplus with the industrial power of the United States. To a certain extent, it was. Because after the launch of the Carnegie factories, the United States overtook Britain in steel production. Then, after the launch of the Ford and General Motors factories, the United States became the world's largest car manufacturer. After World War II, USA became the largest arms manufacturer in the world and the most powerful industrial power. And the trade surplus was one of the indicators of this industrial power. Nevertheless, when in the 1960s the United States was faced with a choice between a trade deficit and the financial power of the dollar as the main world currency, the United States chose the dollar. The very necessity of such a choice arose for the following reason. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the Americans forced the war-weakened Allies to accept a new format of the world financial system, according to which the dollar was equal to gold, and the United States guaranteed the convertibility of this dollar at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. However, less than 20 years of this system began to fail. Due to the rapid post-war recovery of European countries and the rapid development of the world economy, the United States was forced to increase the emission of the dollar. This was necessary to ensure the growing trade turnover between countries, as in the case of Germany or Japan, in which exports to the United States exceeded imports from the United States, and which led to the accumulation of dollar reserves in these countries. And since the gold reserves in the USA were limited, many people feared that sooner or later the USA would not be able to provide all the dollars issued with the available gold. And then the economist Robert Triffin formulated a hypothesis that was called the Triffin Dilemma. If the USA continues to provide the world with dollars, including through its own trade deficit, then it risks undermining confidence in the dollar, because over time the USA will not be able to guarantee the convertibility of the dollar into gold. And this was partly true, because already in the 60s, the unofficial dollar exchange rate against gold exceeded $40 per ounce, although the official one remained at $35. Some countries, fearing devaluation, threatened to exchange all their dollars for gold. And Charles de Gaulle even sent ships to the USA to take away the gold, which of course further undermined the Bretton Woods system and the ability of the Fed to maintain the exchange rate at $35 per ounce of gold. Later, recognizing his own inability to maintain a fixed dollar-to-gold exchange rate, in 1971, Nixon decided to withdraw from the Bretton Woods system, completely abandoning the dollar's peg to gold. This step immediately led to a rapid depreciation of the dollar. And although many feared that this would lead to a catastrophe, at that time such a step provided the United States with a great strategic advantage. The dollar became an independent reserve currency. Of course, in the past there were also cases when the currency of a powerful country was considered a reserve currency. But previously, all these currencies were pegged to precious metals, and it was difficult to call them independent reserve currencies. And it was the dollar that became the first independent currency that completely supplanted and replaced precious metals. And this new status of an independent reserve currency provided the country with unique advantages. The United States could borrow exclusively in its own currency, which it could freely print. Also, all international trade of the United States was conducted exclusively in dollars. And in turn, the growing trade deficit and balance of payments deficit no longer created economic problems, such as currency crises or defaults. Moreover, countries that had surplus dollars were forced to reinvest them in the United States, either buy U.S. Treasury bonds or buy stocks, or invest in a business. And it was during that period that an alternative view began to form in the United States that the trade deficit was not a problem, because dollars were still reinvested in the U.S. economy. At the same time, it cannot be said that the trade deficit ceased to worry Americans. One part of Americans considered the trade deficit a problem, and the other did not. One part believed that the domestic market should be protected and the growth of imports should be limited, while the other opposed any support for domestic producers and any restrictions and duties, indicating that the problem of the deficit was far-fetched. And the rivalry between these camps will define American trade policy in the years to come. It can also be said that despite some victories for the opponents of deficits, until 2008 the free market ideology that deficits were not a problem prevailed in the United States. Then, after the 2008 crisis, a paradigm shift occurred. Although the crisis was only a trigger for problems that had been gradually growing over the past decades, back in the 1970s, the trend of offshoring began, when, in order to reduce production costs, American companies began to massively open production facilities in other countries. And then, within one international corporation, the so-called intra-firm trade began to form. When one legal entity of the corporation in one country sold goods and services to another legal entity registered in another country. In general, business has been using such tools for a very long time. But in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a boom in such intra-firm international trade. And if in the past, such situations did not affect the country's domestic economy due to their small scale, then the new trend has greatly changed it. The decline in the share of employment in the industrial sector in the United States occurred not least due to this new trend. Moreover, China has done what no other country that has received such foreign investment has been able to do. China has built its own industry with this investment, which now challenges the Western world. Therefore, the problem of the trade deficit has two deep causes. The first is that U.S. business is lifting and strengthening other economies, not its own. The second is that Chinese business, through enormous government support, is crowding out and destroying American business. And that is how the era of confrontation between the U.S. and China began.